You got a PhD in chemistry from Oxford. How did you become interested in medicine and healthcare?
Actually, I had a first degree in chemistry, and then I had a PhD in biophysics. When I decided what to do for my PhD, it seemed to me that there were no real problems left in chemistry to attract me. Of course, I was wrong. Chemistry has rolled ahead quite effectively. But I became very interested in biological science, which was at a time when using physical techniques, and the work we did was on nuclear magnetic resonance, physical techniques to explore biology was really opening up.
And so you're a key member in the setup of CASME. Can you tell me a little more about the role of the organisation and what it hopes to achieve in the future?
Yes, CASME, which is called the Centre for the Advancement of Sustainable Medical Innovation, was indeed my brainchild, but then I managed to get two people, one in Oxford and one in UCL, a guy called John Bell in Oxford and John Took in UCL, to support creating an inter-university centre. Actually, that centre has evolved into a collaborative that involves more than two universities. But the real focus of the CASME adventure, if you like, was to look at all of the challenges associated with translating the technology that we all know is happening in the lab into real products and services, and trying to accelerate that process, making it more cost efficient as well.
And how's working with or getting the UCL and the Oxford sort of people working together?
Getting academics to work together, even within the same university, can have its challenges. But no, we have fellows, or we had fellows in both Oxford and UCL, and we now have a wider range of fellows. Of course, most academics are interested in the very specific thing that they are doing, their discipline, if you like. The challenge that CASME has been working on is interdisciplinary collaboration, because you can only really change the process of translation and commercialization of technology by working together across boundaries. So not just research, not just biological research, chemical research, regulatory science, development, how clinical development should run, even all the way through to how the NHS works and how the NHS funds new technology. So it's an inherently interdisciplinary thing.
So you mentioned the NHS there. How can your work at CASME help? So obviously it's come up in the news quite a lot recently, the NHS. How can medical innovation and an organisation like CASME sort of help the NHS?
Well, I have a strong point of view about innovation in the NHS, which is innovation is actually the only hope for the future of the NHS. If we continue to deliver the care that we deliver today in the way that we deliver it to late stages of disease using expensive technologies, whether they be operations, medical procedures or drugs, then we will run out of money in the health systems, not just here in the UK, but across the world. So we really have to apply innovation as proactively as we can, and that includes digital innovation, which we didn't spend a lot of time in CASME looking at, but which I've spent more time since. Let me give you a couple of examples. So I took part in something called the Accelerated Access Review, which was about how do we get technology more rapidly into the NHS. That was not a very accelerated process, but we eventually delivered our report. The government eventually agreed with it, and they created the Accelerated Access Collaborative. So they pick out a few technologies every year that they believe are genuinely transformative, and try and work out how we can more rapidly move things through regulatory approval, NICE approval, and then NHS uptake. So I'm quite pleased with the progress we've made there. We've also created something called the Academic Health Science Networks, and I chair one of them, the one based actually in South London, not where we are in North London. But these academic health science networks really do the grunt work, so to speak, of trying to take technologies and get people in the NHS who are very busy to take up something that's new. I used to think it was only cost that was the barrier to uptake of new technologies. It's actually the time of clinicians as seriously as that. Although I was pleased this morning to see that yet another of the Tory promises is about 500 million for new medical technologies. So it would be kind of nice if that comes through.
So I've seen a couple of your other talks, and I've heard you talk about the innovation gap before. Could you sort of explain what that is and what the state of it is today?
Well, there's actually, I think, about 5. gaps in translation, as I call them.
So sorry, can we just start that answer just one more time? Just had a bit of a bang on the sound.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
So you were asking about gaps in translation of innovations through to commercial products and useful impact for patients. There are actually, I think, about 5 of these gaps. The first one is what people actually work on in the lab and whether it is genuinely translatable or not. A lot of work is done in either very theoretically or on animals that aren't very good models for human disease. The second gap is really in the minds, I think, of most academics, most academic researchers, which is what they're driven by, is getting their grants, making their publications, getting their prizes, doing their lectures. The Nobel lecture will be the ideal one for all of them. They really don't think most of the time, most of them, about how this can be brought through. So that's one. The next gap is really the long process of development and regulatory approval. So lots of things fall out. If you take therapeutics, we start at about 5,000 drugs down the pipeline for every one that comes out. So that's an incredibly inefficient process. But even when those drugs do come out, or the products come out, what I was talking about a moment ago, about the conservatism of clinicians and the busyness of clinicians, and also the lack of compliance by patients or adherence by patients. So we have to, even if something has been brought through, it's been developed, it's been approved, it's going to be reimbursed, there's still a barrier there. The fifth barrier is actually, I think, working back from what's actually happening to learn how we can do things better. So that's the big data revolution. So I think now we have companies like Google, but many other companies really looking to see what can we deduce from what actually happens in practice to what should be happening and what research would be most effective.
Amazing. And so what are you most excited about in the field? What projects are you doing? And even more general than that, what excites you most?
So I'm doing one thing I think that is really interesting to me, which is putting artificial intelligence technology much more effectively into clinical decision making. Now, various companies are looking at how you can use AI programs to read scans, for example. Scans of the eye, scans of mammograms, those kinds of things. What I'm really interested in is drilling down in deep data analysis to figure out what do we know about really complex cases and really complex patients? And can we, by looking at relatively small but relatively deep data sets, enable doctors to make much better decisions in the real world? Most clinical development is done on rather carefully selected patients in what are called randomized controlled trials. You can't do a randomized controlled trial on comorbidities, which comorbidities might be affecting the effectiveness of a therapy, which other drugs might be confounding the effects of the new drug. So being able to use artificial intelligence to figure out what is working and why it is working in the real world. I have a company called MetaDevice that's doing that.